Okay, let's kick off this deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that, well, many people think of as passive income, but as our source material makes clear, it's anything but simple. Landlording.
Mm,
And specifically those expenses that, you know, have a knack for staying hidden until they hit your wallet hard.
yeah.
You shared a really valuable guide with us, focused squarely on landlords' hidden expenses. So our mission today is to unpack the key insights from this source.
Right.
We're aiming to move beyond just, collecting rent checks and really get into the true financial landscape, uncovering costs that are often overlooked when you first start planning.
Exactly. And the source really positions this knowledge as essential. It's not just about listing costs, it's more about arming you, our listener, with the specific knowledge needed for proper financial planning.
Okay.
The goal, as the guide puts it, is really to ensure you protect your investment and actually turn rental property into a successful long-term wealth building tool. It really requires a proactive approach, not the sort of set it and forget it mindset.
Right. Definitely not passive in that sense. Okay, so the source identifies 13 distinct areas where these hidden costs tend to pop up. Instead of just rattling them off one by one, maybe let's group them a bit. See the bigger picture.
That makes sense.
Let's start with the costs related to, well, getting and keeping tenants.
Yeah, that sounds good. Tenant-related issues are often, where those unexpected costs first surface.
The first key area the source highlights is tenant turnover and vacancy loss. I think most new landlords might hope tenants stay for years, right? But the source points out turnover is pretty much inevitable, and it's expensive.
Absolutely. The guide stresses that this isn't just about the lost rent during the vacancy period. What's often missed are all the associated costs.
Like what?
Well, the cleaning between tenants, maybe some minor repairs or painting, definitely the marketing to find someone new, the time and cost of screening applicants, and just the admin hassle involved. It adds up quickly.
And the source gives specific numbers for planning, which I found really helpful. It actually recommends building in a 5–10% vacancy rate into your income projections right
Or-
from the start.
Yeah, that buffer is essential.
And to try and reduce that turnover, it suggests being proactive, like offering renewal incentives before a lease is even up
Good idea.
and maintaining a list of pre-screened applicants so you're not, scrambling from scratch when someone does give notice.
Which leads directly into another major hidden cost, the source flags. The cost of, well, poor quality tenants.
Oh, yes.
The temptation when you're facing that vacancy loss is just to rush the process, fill the spot quickly. But the source gives a pretty stern warning about cutting corners on tenant screening.
Yeah, this seems like a place where trying to save a little time or money up front can really backfire spectacularly.
Oh, definitely. It can lead to, significant property damage, months of unpaid rent, and then the whole lengthy and very expensive eviction process. The source is emphatic here. Always conduct full background and credit checks. It's presented as non-negotiable.
Right, and it's not just about the credit score either. The source highlights needing references from previous landlords. They can often give you insights, that a credit report just won't show.
Exactly.
And crucially, using a detailed standard lease agreement, one that's maybe drafted or at least reviewed by a legal professional to make sure your interests are actually protected.
hmm Speaking of legal matters, that brings us neatly to another distinct hidden expense, the source lists, legal fees and eviction costs.
Right. I suppose many landlords might think, oh, I can just handle disputes informally, have a chat. But the source suggests that's a risky gamble.
It really is. The source points out that even seemingly minor disagreements can escalate quickly, and navigating landlord-tenant law, well, it's complex and varies by location. Doing it without expertise is, frankly, dangerous.
So budgeting for potential legal costs is necessary then.
Yes, absolutely. Whether that's for consulting an attorney up front to get your lease right, or for handling actual disputes, or worst case, an eviction down the line, you need a line item for it.
And the guide even suggests looking into specific insurance policies, things that might cover legal disputes or provide some sort of eviction protection. That's a level of detail I think many would miss.
It is. It's all about being prepared for those worst case scenarios the source warns about, not just hoping they won't happen.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit, moving from the tenants to the physical property itself, keeping it in good shape. The source identifies property maintenance and repairs as a huge hidden cost, often underestimated, maybe because landlords just budget for fixing things after they break.
Yeah, that's a common trap. The source's key insight here, though, is that proactive maintenance is dramatically cheaper in the long run than reactive repairs.
Also,
Well, neglecting small issues, a tiny leak, a funny noise from the furnace, it almost guaranteed, leads to much bigger, much more expensive problems later on. Think major water damage, a full system failure requiring emergency replacement, things like that.
so prevention is better than cure, financially speaking.
Exactly. And this is where the source gets really concrete with budgeting advice. It suggests setting aside 1–2% of the property's value, not the rent, the value annually just for maintenance.
Wow, 1–2% of the value. That's a significant chunk of change, not just pocket money.
It is, and it also stresses having a separate emergency reserve fund specifically for those unexpected major breakdowns. Plus, implementing a schedule for regular inspections, maybe quarterly or semi-annually, to actually catch problems when they're still small and manageable.
Okay. And closely related to that are capital expenditures, or CapEx. The source notes these are often completely ignored in budgeting. These are the really big ticket items, right?
Yeah, exactly. Things like a new roof, replacing the entire HVAC system, maybe major appliance replacements in the kitchen, or even significant structural repairs.
These aren't your routine repairs, obviously. They're infrequent, but they come with a very large price tag. And they're necessary to maintain the property's value and, well, keep it functional over the long term.
Right. The source advises setting aside funds for these every single year, treating it almost like a sinking fund specifically for the depreciation of these major systems. You know, they'll need replacing eventually.
And the source connects this to adding value too, doesn't it?
It does. It recommends inspecting these major systems regularly, not just waiting for failure, and prioritizing those capital improvements that not only maintain the property, but might actually add value or reduce future operating costs, like putting in energy-efficient windows or appliances.
That ties into the third cost related to the property's physical lifespan, depreciation and wear and tear. The source highlights that because depreciation is so gradual, its impact isn't really felt day to day, but it's a very real cost over time.
Yeah, and this is more than just an accounting term, although it definitely has tax implications the source probably touches on.
Yeah.
It's about the physical aging and, the wearing out of different components of the property.
So how do you budget for something so gradual?
Well, the source's budgeting tips here involve having a replacement plan, knowing the typical lifespan of major fixtures, appliances, carpets, paint, etc., and using that depreciation insight maybe to schedule updates proactively rather than waiting for something to fail or look completely run down.
Right.
And those routine inspections we mentioned for maintenance, they should also specifically look for signs of wear and tear that signal something might need attention soon.
Okay, moving on from the physical building itself, let's look at some of the external and overhead financial realities the source dives into. Property management fees are a big one, obviously, if you're not planning to self-manage.
Yeah.
That typical 8–12% of the monthly rent fee. It's substantial and can easily be missed in those initial cash flow calculations if you're dreaming of doing it all yourself.
You absolutely have to factor this in upfront if you're even considering using a manager. The source frames the choice self-management versus hiring help as a value proposition, meaning it's not just about the fee itself. You have to evaluate that cost against the potential time saved, the expertise you gain in things like tenant screening and legal compliance, and maybe even achieving higher tenant satisfaction and retention because a professional is handling things smoothly.
That makes sense. Then there are utilities and property taxes. Now, tenants often pay their own usage-based utilities, like electricity, but the source warns against assuming all utilities are covered by the tenant or forgetting about property taxes entirely.
Or assuming they stay constant.
Right. Especially property taxes.
Yeah, property taxes are notorious for increasing over time. The source specifically recommends budgeting for annual increases in your property tax estimates. Don't just use last year's number.
And for utilities,
Tracking trends is key, and the guide suggests looking for opportunities to implement some of those energy-efficient upgrades we mentioned earlier. They can make the property more attractive and potentially lower some shared or landlord-paid utility costs, if any apply.
insurance premiums are another area where the source identifies a common and potentially costly oversight,
Yeah.
just relying on a standard homeowner's policy.
Yeah, big mistake. Rental properties need specific landlord insurance. It's different, and yes, it's often more expensive than a standard homeowner policy.
Because the risks are different, presumably.
Exactly. Crucially, standard homeowner policies do not cover business activities or the specific risks associated with having tenants living in your property.
So what does the source recommend?
It stresses getting that landlord-specific coverage. And not just getting it, but reviewing your policy annually, comparing providers to make sure you have adequate coverage for liability, property damage related to tenants, and considering those additional coverages like loss of rent insurance or even that legal cost coverage we talked about earlier.
Okay. And then there are the broader economic factors, things outside your direct control that can significantly impact your costs. The source points to inflation and rising interest rates as hidden expenses. Landlords might feel a bit insulated in stable markets, maybe, but the source warns that ignoring economic volatility is pretty risky.
It really is. Inflation impacts, well, pretty much everything over time. The cost of repairs, materials, labor, insurance, premiums. And rising interest rates obviously affect your financing costs, whether that's on the initial purchase or if you need to refinance later.
So what can you do? You can't control the economy.
No, but you can plan for it.
Sure.
The source recommends proactive measures, things like securing fixed-rate mortgages whenever possible to lock in borrowing costs, building buffers into your cash flow model specifically to absorb rising operational costs, and regularly revisiting your financial projections to account for these macroeconomic shifts. Don't just assume costs will stay flat.
Right. Stay vigilant. Okay, finally, let's look at some broader business and regulatory landscape costs the source highlights. First up, neighborhood changes. Now, that might not seem like a direct expense in the typical sense.
But it absolutely can be, yeah.
The source cautions against just relying on historic property values or, not paying attention to what's happening in the area around your property.
Definitely. Changes in local zoning laws, new developments coming in or failing to come in, shifts in neighborhood demographics, even just increased rental competition nearby. All of that can impact your property's value, the rental demand, and maybe even the level of maintenance or upgrades needed just to stay competitive.
So what's the strategy there?
The source's advice is really about staying informed. Keep up with local market dynamics, zoning changes, development plans. And if you have multiple properties, maybe consider diversifying geographically to spread out the risk tied to any one specific neighborhood's future. Investing in areas with stable or, ideally, growing demand is key.
Makes sense. Then there's regulatory compliance and licensing costs. The source says these are often completely missed, especially maybe by landlords managing just one or two properties themselves.
Yeah, these rules can vary wildly from city to city, state to state. They cover everything from rental licenses, required inspections, specific safety features like smoke detector types, even how you handle security deposits. And they're not always intuitive.
And ignoring them can lead to trouble.
Big trouble. Fines, legal battles, potentially even being barred from legally renting your property out at all. The source really emphasizes the importance of thoroughly researching all the local laws and regulations that apply to you.
So you need to factor in fees for licenses or mandatory inspections into your budget too.
Absolutely. And keep meticulous records and documentation to prove your compliance, just in case you face an audit or inspection down the road.
Okay, and the very last hidden cost the source brings up, and maybe this is the one most overlooked by individual landlords, is time and opportunity cost.
Ah, yes, the value of your own time.
Exactly. All the hours spent managing the property, dealing with tenant calls, screening applicants, coordinating repairs, handling paperwork. Landlords rarely assign a clear monetary value to that time, do they?
No, they often don't. But this is a really powerful point from the source. Your time has value. It actually suggests trying to estimate the value of your time per hour.
Okay.
And
So?
think, if you're spending, say, 10 hours a month on tasks that could be done more efficiently by specialized software or by hiring a contractor or by a property manager, well, that's a real cost to you.
The cost of not doing something else with that time.
Precisely. That's the opportunity cost. The source recommends considering outsourcing tasks that are either overly time-consuming or perhaps outside your core skills, and definitely leveraging property management software to streamline operations and save time.
And that saved time could be invested elsewhere.
Right. In finding more deals, improving your existing properties, focusing on your main career, or frankly, just having more free time, that's the trade-off.
Good. Wow. Okay. So bringing this all together, 13 potential hidden costs. What does this deep dive into the source material really boil down to for someone who's a landlord or thinking about becoming one?
Well, I think the source's core message is undeniably clear, and frankly, it's quite a challenge to that whole passive income myth we started with.
Yeah.
Successful landlording hinges on meticulously budgeting for these potentially hidden costs, All of them. It's not just about collecting rent, it's about actively managing a business, a complex one with numerous variables.
Exactly. Succeeding really requires foresight and diligent financial planning that goes way beyond just calculating the mortgage payment, taxes, and basic insurance.
Absolutely.
The source gives us that comprehensive list. What was it? Maintenance and repairs,
Hmm.
tenant turnover, poor quality tenants,
Yeah.
management fees if you use them, utilities and taxes, legal and eviction costs, those big capital expenditures.
Neighborhood changes, insurance premiums, regulatory compliance and licensing, depreciation, inflation, and interest rates.
And finally, your own time and opportunity cost. It's a really robust framework when you see it all laid out.
It is. And the source leaves us with a final thought, really a call to action for you, our listener.
Okay.
It emphasizes that protecting your investment, ensuring its long-term profitability, it starts with this kind of detailed, honest planning.
So what does it recommend you do?
It specifically recommends you review your current budget or create one if you haven't. Update your cash flow models based on these potential hidden costs we've discussed, and just ensure you've truly accounted for all of them realistically.
And it leaves you with a question to ponder.
Yeah, basically asking what stands out to you from this deep dive. Which of these areas feels like the most important one for you to address in your own planning right now? That's the question the source really prompts us all to consider.
Hmm. That's definitely a valuable takeaway to sit with from this guide.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for sharing this source material with us for this deep dive. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Understanding these hidden costs, it truly highlights the realities of rental property investment. I think it's incredibly valuable knowledge for anyone already involved or even just considering it.
Agreed. It gives you a much clearer picture. Okay, that wraps up our deep dive for today.